Welcome to today's episode of the Leadership Adventure. Today I'm excited to have Judy Lancaster joining me. Judy has been a sales leader in her career, working at Sony Electronics for about 30 years. Now, Judy is a registered therapeutic counselor. Judy, first, I'd love to just invite you to share what was it like to be a sales leader, and what do you think are the most important things that helped you be successful?
Um, what was it like? Well, it was fast paced. It was exciting. Being in electronics with Sony, there was so many toys, and I really loved it. I loved the technical side of it. So there was a lot of, you had to know a lot about your product and that. So it was always very, very interesting, fast paced, very demanding. I think one of the reasons why I was successful at my positions that I went through, and I had various positions, but in the end it was really about the amount of knowledge and understanding that you had for the client and for the products that you were going to put into their stores, and why it would help them, and having that keen knowledge. I think with my background with Sony, starting right from the very beginning, like the sales floor, understanding what the salesperson goes through, and then going right through that whole process really helped me design good programs for my clients at a later date. Um, I was also, I think being a woman gave me a little bit of an advantage on really honing in on that relationship. So I feel that women have a sort of a nurturing side. So we listen more, and listening for those cues and having that curiosity, even a little bit of people pleasing in there. So yeah, so it's a lot of combination of things too.
Was it at that time, was it a highly competitive role?
Very competitive. Yes. In, as a strategic account manager, it really was kind of more of a boys' club. And I was the only female strategic manager at that time. There was a lot of competition. There was a lot of, trying to outdo each other. We all had different products, so it was pretty hard to, and different budgets. So it was pretty hard to direct compare. But there definitely was, budgets, goals, breaking those, going on. And so it was a lot of sort of jockeying about, who's doing the best job there. Could be very intimidating, I think, sometimes. But I was a little bit, maybe sometimes even obnoxious. um, but, I had a louder voice. And I had to, in some cases, I had to in order to just be heard.
Yeah, and so that's something that I have heard quite a bit, right? Is that desire to be heard. And it's one of the challenges that I hear, are often like women in STEM subjects are frustrated about a lot of the time. Was there anything else that you feel helped you to have a voice?
I was very persistent, and I had a lot of knowledge. I had a lot of knowledge about the process of sales and what what retail needed. Even though I was in wholesale, I really had a really good background of retail. I also knew my products inside out, probably better than anyone. This really helped me in, when we got into the boardroom and we were talking, discussing, what things would be sold for, which store should we put them in, and all of that. And I think I had that confidence, and there was respect for that. And that really helped me. So that product knowledge, but just that experience gave me the confidence to be able to stand up against all the noise that was, would be in the room. So, yeah.
Tell me about the first time you had to step foot in a boardroom. What was that like for you?
Can you say knees knocking?
Really?
um,
Okay.
yeah, I was really intimidated when I first got my position in the wholesale. I had been in retail for quite some time. Um, and when I moved over to wholesale, I felt intimidated. There was all these guys running around with suits, and I had really put them on a much higher pedestal than me. I really had that imposter syndrome, like, oh, my nuts, I shouldn't be here. This is crazy. Somebody's going to find out. Somebody's going to find out. And so the first time we were in a boardroom is I had to put together sort of the idea of what I wanted to do. I was in special markets at that time, and I had to put together sort of a presentation and what I wanted to do with this position and that. And sweaty palms, heart beating, the usual, I think, when you first find yourself in a boardroom with all men, all staring at you, all with suits, and you're just sitting there going, okay, I can
And how
do
many
this.
people were there?
For that one, I think there was about, if I can remember, I think I'm trying to remember the actual table, and I would say there's probably 9, which is,
Okay.
not a big
Mhm.
crowd, but these people are all there judging you. And I felt
Yeah, it's
very.
not the first time I've heard that sense of, I have had clients that have told me they really feel like the others are up on this pedestal because of their age, usually, that especially from women who are younger.
Mhm.
So I'm not surprised to hear that, but I haven't heard this story before, so I was curious from you.
Yeah.
um, and so, what do you think kept you there for 30 years? That's a long time to commit to an organization these days.
It is, and I always thought there was something wrong with me for sticking with the same. I had a lot of other friends that were moving all over the place. Every 5 years, they would go to another corporation or whatever. I think what kept me there so long was that I kept changing my position.
Hmm.
So every few years, or every couple of years, I would, excuse me, start with something else. In retail, I was within retail for 9 years as well before I moved for wholesale. Um, Once I got to wholesale, I was in a new position almost every 3 years. It was almost like, okay, year 3 is coming up. I wonder what I'm going to get now. And always something would come up. And I had a lot of positions that Sony wanted to try for the first time. And for some reason, they kept grabbing me. And I don't know if that was because I was great with change and I did have a lot of really good ideas. And I think some of the managers liked that about me, and they'd say, okay, let's just put Judy in there and we'll see if this sticks. I was lucky
Yeah,
on all of them. They all stuck. So again, they went right across Canada. So yeah.
that's great. And Judy, I was curious, if with those transitions there was anything else that you think helped you. Was it that they had a really good career program at Sony, or was it, your relationships and your personal brand only that you think made a difference there? Because this is something I see as well, as that women and men get stuck sometimes at manager level, and then they might be in the same role for 5, 6 years and
Mm.
there's no path, and they aren't getting time with their managers necessarily to have those kinds of conversations about growth. So I'm curious if there's anything else that you think really made a difference for you.
It was a bit of a battle. Um, you know, I did have to sit down with the manager quite often and let them know that I'm interested more than just being, you know, um, second tier sales or whatever. Um, But there was also, you know, I mean, we had good benefits with Sony. We had, you know, things that sort of kept us, like our review every year, that increased our income. So there was a lot of motivation there as far as being with, you know, good benefits. It was a really nice company. We went on trips. We had all sorts of incentives. That kind of thing, you know, kept you motivated. But there also was growth for me because every 3
Mhm.
years they were giving me something, another choice to try something different. I think for me personally, that really kept me there. And I found that it's almost like you get bored after a while doing the same thing.
Mhm.
And they seem to be maybe tuned into me as well, saying, okay, it's time. Would you like to try this now? And I like that about them, that they gave me that trust, that they could give me this new position and go forward. And I think I really sort of clasped onto that and went with it and enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's great that they had that foresight to have those conversations, because that's certainly something that I ran into myself, where I was ready for a change, 5 years into my role. I had enjoyed the role, the company. I didn't want to leave the company, but I had outgrown the role and I didn't know what else I could do. And so I ended up leaving in the end because I just couldn't, internally find a path. But I know a lot of people try first internally, and then if they like the organization, they are reluctant to leave, right? But then often end up finding a way out. So it's unfortunate that people have to often leave a company. What is it that you feel contributed to you finally walking away after such a long period of time from that role?
Oh, that was kind of like the perfect storm. So that happened not even with just within the company, that happened within my own personal life as well. And home life was not giving me the support to continue. There was a lot of stress at work. There were changes when the company started moving and transitioning to merge with the US. And so there was a lot of layoffs. We were doing more work than normal. There was a lot of changes in personnel. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the biggest changes was I ended up having a boss that was no longer compatible with me and turned into a micromanager,
Mm-hmm.
which in the past, a lot of my managers realized that with my experience in that, they didn't need to coddle me. They didn't need to look over my shoulder. Just me coming in and telling them, hey, I'm doing this was okay. This person was very different and even ruined a couple of sales, which, made it even worse.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
and then that added stress going home and then having nothing there for me as well. And I think that eventually just said I was just like, okay, I'm kind of done with all of this.
Yeah. And so what happened next?
Ah, well, first I started going to therapy because I thought, okay, maybe I can regulate myself. Maybe I can do something. Maybe it's time for me to start doing some introspection. Maybe it's my problem. And there was definitely some things that I needed to deal with. Um, but it also, what therapy did for me was it opened my eyes to how dysfunctional I was. I was putting everything into work. There was not a lot of self-care there. There was more people pleasing. There was a lot of things that I was kind of doing wrong. And, now I look back and it's hard to say, but I was pointing the blame when really it's not that should have been blaming myself, but I should have been more aware of how my past life was making me react in my present life. And once I started figuring those things out, I started realizing, it was like opening your eyes. I started realizing like, okay, wow, I, I have been going on without support, with all of these things that are going against my values, going against my self-worth, you know, and I need to make changes. So I did. I had been wanting to make a change with my marriage for a while. I was very unhappy, but I felt inclined or obligated to stick around. And then when I started realizing it, that I shouldn't be obligated, that in fact, what was coming up for me was really quite okay. It was okay to feel like this is not right, to not be supported. And I was coming to a burnout situation, and I knew I was crashing. And the first thing I thought, I can't go forward until I make a life better for me. And the life better for me is to get out of this relationship, both with the company and with my husband. So that was my next step.
Wow. So two huge changes at the same time.
It was, yeah, it was actually, there was a lot of people in shock because I really kept it under the radar. And so all of a sudden I was doing all of this. And then, the next month it was like, where are you? Oh, I'm in Barcelona. So it was suddenly a huge shift. And then I told people what had happened. So, yeah.
Wow. And so can I ask you, what was the support that you were lacking, that you felt that really was the thing that was the key turning point for you?
I didn't have an unkind husband or anything like that. It was more around the emotional support and the practical support, just running the household. So the emotional support came where I didn't have anyone to sort of turn to. So when I was going through anything at work, I couldn't come home and sort of vent or voice out, things that were going on with me. I didn't have that kind of support.
Mm-hmm.
I had somebody who couldn't take that in. They couldn't just sit and listen, and then, it became more of an argument. So then I stopped
Okay.
doing that. Right? So I stopped doing that. I didn't have somebody I could vent to. And
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not talking about just coming home and oh, that person and this person, but really sort of feel like I feel frightened right now. I feel, like these things are
Mm-hmm.
happening. And I didn't have the practical support, I think, was the biggest thing. So my husband had lost his job at that time already 11 years earlier. When he lost his job, he put together a plan quickly for me. Okay, I'm going to be off my job for 2 years and we can do it. Even though we lost half our income, we just bought a house. There was all this, suddenly he just threw all of this burden onto me. And at the time, I was such a little go-getter. I was like, yeah, okay, oh, yeah, okay, we can do this. Not realizing I was heading for a long-term slow burn,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And then eventually he decided not to go back to work. Yeah. And then
So
he also, sorry, go
all the
ahead.
responsibilities fell on you.
All of that. And he never really was a good sort of homemaker. So not only now was I doing all the financial, had that financial burden, I also had the home burden too. So I was doing all the cooking and I was doing mostly the cleaning. I was looking after everybody. I was also looking after my father and my aunt, who were elderly and in a home. And I had to work all of that. So I was, like I said, it was a perfect storm of me going into a crash zone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely a tough situation. And so what was that the thing that really allowed you to decide that you weren't obligated?
Oh, well, that was therapy. And I'm not trying to push therapy on everybody, but it really is, it made a big difference. I never talked to anyone about anything. I kept a lot inside, and I think that was one of my bigger mistakes. And I maybe didn't have to crash. When I look back at it, I think, wow, if I had a good therapist, or if I had somebody that I could go to talk about these things,
Mm-hmm.
maybe I could have resolved more things. Um, Not that I resent any of it, because I am now where I am, and I'm very happy to be where I am. Um, but one of the things that I think taught me was my eyes opening and saying, how much am I responsible for? And am I responsible for all these people? And what's their part in the responsibility? And then realizing my upbringing and my conditioning and all of that put me there, but I didn't belong there. And I think realizing that, it was like, oh, I have choices here. I don't need to take on everybody else's problems,
Mm-hmm.
including my husband's.
Yeah. How did he react when you decided that?
You know, Even though we had sat down and I had told him quite a few times on occasion that I really needed more support, and he would do it for a little while, and then it would, teeter off again. In the
Mm-hmm.
end, it was more of an explosion. And then I just said, I cannot do this anymore, and I don't know how to fix it. He was devastated and shocked, like he had never heard it before. And I was shocked that he was shocked he'd never heard it before. And I hear that so often when I speak to my other friends and other women and that have gone through the same thing. They all say it. He acts so shocked, but I'm shocked that he's shocked because I have been telling them for this. So it is, I think it's not rare.
Yeah. Yeah. I think much more common than we probably know, because these things aren't necessarily discussed openly. This is one of the reasons I thought it's valuable to have these conversations, so that
Mhm.
other people can see themselves as well and understand that they can make changes, as well as difficult as it can be. How did you know you were crashing? What were you experiencing in terms of, the burnout? What did you sense and feel? I'm curious about that too, because I know that words are tossed around a lot, but they're not always the same experiences. So I'd love to hear what that was like for you.
Yeah, I think everyone processes it differently. For me, it was um, dissociation. Really, I would come home, cook a meal, grab a glass of wine, go sit in the living room, um, and either watch a movie. I was a bit of a gamer. I loved getting on and playing on my PlayStation, so I could dissociate for quite a few hours there. I just found myself really unhappy, and I couldn't even really pinpoint why I was so unhappy, because my life was actually, if you were just a stranger standing on the street and looking, I had a beautiful home, I had beautiful car, I had a husband that looked kind and loving and caring, um, and I had a great job, a really high paying job. I had everything, yet I was so unfulfilled and so unhappy, and I could just feel that in every part of me, and I was lacking that motivation. I was lacking that love for life. I was losing the motivation to go out as much. But I think dissociation by watching binge watching something, or
Mhm.
and then just trying to stay away from anybody like that might ask me questions about how I'm doing, because I was so frightened they were going to ask me like, "Oh,
Wow.
how are things?" And I would be like, "They're okay. They're okay." And just kind of giving myself up,
Wow.
right?
Is it that you didn't wanna share with those people, or you didn't wanna talk about it at all?
I didn't want to talk about it, but I also feel, I think, a little ashamed that
Mm.
I was always sort of looked at as the person who always kept everything together. My life was great, and I didn't want to admit that excuse me, that my life was not good. And I was kind of ashamed that I had let it gone on so long, and I was so unhappy, and I didn't want to tell anybody. Like literally I was
Wow.
keeping all of this. Yeah.
How long do you think you kept yourself in that place?
You know, I when I go back and I look at that whole, like, I think I always say to myself, I should have left after the second year that he was out of a job, but I went right up to 12 years. I think the last 3 to 2 years were the ones that really brought me down to a point
Mhm.
where I should have never gone. But I think I don't know what I was thinking. I think I was thinking, we're going to come out of this. It's temporary. He's not a bad guy. It's just that I can't, and my job, I'll get a different job. But, I think it was, I didn't know really how to change things. I felt like I had let it go down so low that I was just unhappy. There was nothing that was going to make me happy. I just wanted it all to go away.
Mhm. Wow. So if you were in that situation now, what would you do differently than before?
Well, I would never stay, that's for sure. I would see, I think now I would see the signs so much quicker. I would, that first discussion of, I think, well, first of all, I have way more boundaries. Um, I have way more self-worth than what I had before. I don't put people on pedestals anymore. Um, I, you know, I just have more respect for myself as well. And if anybody had come up to me with a 2-year plan of staying off work and putting all the burden on me, I would have I would just say, no, that's not going to work. It works great for you, but it wouldn't work for me. So I think I would see those red flags a lot sooner. Um, and I would be able to work with the person, whoever it is, or work in the situation where I would get something out of it as well, and not just, okay, I'm doing this for somebody else. So I think I've backed away from the people pleasing, and I've set new boundaries, and yeah,
Mhm.
that's helped a lot.
Yeah, and so, you've learned a lot about this obviously in your counseling work, and I'm curious if, now might be a good time to ask you where do those tendencies come from? The tendency for people pleasing. Is that something that is like a natural character trait, or has that come from conditioning through how we are raised?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, almost everything we do today is, or how we react, or how our beliefs and everything come from our child rearing days. And, mostly we can take different paths along the way. We can be, relearn things as we go along, but our core beliefs and everything usually come from our child rearing, our caretakers, how they bring us up. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the attachment theory.
Yes, I have.
And yeah, and so the attachment theory can answer a lot of questions about, who you are, how you react in relationships. and that. And so there's different tools that you can use in with the therapist to sort of determine what sort of a person you are and why you're like that. And so people pleasers sometimes, they come from, and not always, like, these things are never 100%, right? So that's always something to keep in mind, that if you go through these things. So a people pleaser would come from maybe a family background where they were sort of disregarded, or they felt that they were with caretakers that they were stepping on eggshells, or they wanted to appease them because they might explode or something, or not be happy with them. And so they learn as very young children, even before they really start figuring why they're doing this, to please them, please their caretakers in any way they can, right? So that they don't get the bad attention. And sometimes it's striving to get that pat on the head. Sometimes it's striving just to not be recognized. Don't get in the line of fire. So a lot of people, there's a lot of volatile families, dysfunctional families. So there's a lot of people pleasers out there. It seems to be one of the main things that, shows up in my clients as well. So it comes from kind of a dysfunctional sort of space that the child feels they have to go out of their way to please in order to get that affection.
Yeah, it is quite a common pattern, and so it's interesting to think more about that, because I have certainly had some of those times as well, and I know, my mother was quite unhappy in her relationship with my father as well, and I feel like I almost stepped in to try and please her, to make her happy, because it was, a difficult situation for her. So I would try and take his role in a way, to make sure she was okay, right? So I understand that, and it's something that I think, it's valuable for everybody to understand where that's stemming from, and that helps us to be more conscious with those choices, whether we decide to go there or not, right? I think that that's a key thing, rather than being on automatic pilot with those habits.
Yeah.
Back to your adventure. So you mentioned Barcelona. Was this the first place you decided to go when you left your role and your marriage?
Yes. Yes. I felt like, well, we sold our, I asked for a divorce. We sold the house and we both went our separate ways. And I'd always wanted to go to Barcelona. I don't know why. I just wanted to. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to take a month. I'm going to go to Barcelona. I'm going to stay in Airbnb for 1 month. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to be there. And I just hopped on a plane, went to Barcelona, fell in love with the city, fell in love with just the freedom of travel, of having new culture, learning things, tasting the food. And I just felt it was like balm on an open wound. And, the first week I cried and I went out and I had fun and I danced and, I did all the things. And it was hard. It was hard to leave Barcelona. I was kind of crying on the plane going out of there, like, oh my gosh, I've got to do this. And within a few days of leaving Barcelona, I booked another flight down to Panama, thinking, okay, I really love this Spanish flair and everything. So I'm
Well,
going to
you and
go
I have
to,
that in common.
well, it's just so lovely. I just love their way of life, right? It's just
Yeah.
dancing and food and music. And um, so, yeah, that was sort of my first little taste into solo travel, because I haven't really, solo travel with work is totally different. I mean,
Yeah.
so I used to
How
have to
how
do
old were
that
you,
with Sony.
can I ask? Because, of course, I know that there are a lot of women who have said to me, I just don't know how you travel alone, all these things. So I'm curious, how old were you when you took that first trip?
Well, so first alone trip, I was 52. And every other trip I'd always been either with a boyfriend or husband or whatever. Um, yeah, so I was 52. I wasn't, I think because I did travel and a little bit with Sony on my own, like, going
Hmm.
to clients and that. So I didn't feel frightened or anything like that. And I never had a problem about eating alone in a restaurant. I just never did. I don't know why. Maybe that was because Sony, I was used to doing that.
Hmm.
But yeah, I was 52 when I first went on my solo trip, and I was so excited and not a bit really afraid. I mean, I just wasn't. And I know that I'm very lucky to have that, because I know a lot of people who are not used to traveling do get very, worried about everything, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, you see it in the travel forums, which I think, we're both a part of. And I was just curious because I have seen a lot more women posting who are actually after a divorce and going out traveling for the first time by themselves. A lot of the time it happens in the 50s. And so that's one of the reasons I asked you that question. And so so Panama was next. And so this was really an opportunity for you to take some time out and just enjoy life. This is what I'm hearing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't know what to do right away. And I thought, something in me just said, the corporate, no, I can't do it. And there was a couple of offers that came in saying, "Oh, you don't work for Sony anymore. Come and talk to us, and we'll make it worthwhile." I think I was just so turned off at that time. I just said, "Thank you so much, but no thank you." And I thought, okay, that's it. I'm taking a couple of years off. My husband did it for 12. I'm going to do it for, I don't know, just a little bit. Let's see, maybe I can even retire on the savings I had, my Sony pension, the sale of the house. Maybe I can just do this. Um, so I went to Panama, and I thought, okay, I'm going to get my residency there. I'm going to live in a warm country. I don't want any more winters. So I went down for a couple months, and I wanted to check it out. And I really, really liked it. Um, so I decided to get my residency and then move down there. Um, but I told you, I already kind of had that travel bug. So even though I got my residency there, I was still hopping all over the place. And I think I realized eventually, like, I didn't really need a residency. I think I just needed to keep moving. So,
Right. Yeah. And I think that we connected around that time because you were heading to Peru as one of your destinations.
no, that's right. Yeah. So that would have been after I had done my Southeast Asia trip, Europe, and yes, and then this time I was, instead of Central America, I was heading to Colombia and Peru. And that was when you reached out and said, "Hey, I have a friend in Peru, and I also gone here and this and this." And then we started talking, which I was so grateful for, because you showed me your guide, and your guide took me, to Machu Picchu and to a bunch of other places. And well, Peru is just so magical. I mean, I'm still in love with that country, I think, more than any other country in the world so far.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I'm actually hoping to go back next year. I'm planning to take a group to the Galapagos Islands and looking to head south after that. There are still places. It's such a huge country. There are still so many places to explore. And
Yeah.
so, I think that you mentioned that you had been considering taking on the counseling route at that time, but you still weren't sure. So what was it that helped you decide
Mm.
whether this is something that you wanted to do?
Well, when I was in Panama, I needed something to do. I always need something to do. I can't be bored. I can't just go to the beach and sip margaritas and listen to music and dance. I was doing that, but I knew that I needed something more. And I got involved with a small sort of community project called Local MPTY Kids. And sorry, not the owner, the founder, I should really look for the right word. He was helping children in El Chorrillo, which was part of it's kind of the red zone in Panama City. And it were gangs and drugs. And so he was sort of giving the children something to do on certain days. So there's like 2 or 3 days a week. We would go in and so I started teaching them. I didn't realize that I met him right at the start of his program. I had no idea. He reached out to me. He saw me on Facebook or something, and I saw his post, and I commented, and I said, "What a beautiful thing you're doing," you know. And then he went, "Yes, come into the city and see me." And I was like, "Oh my God, this person got back to me." And I went into the city and saw him. And I said, wow, we could be teaching them English, even just something, right? And he said, oh, I'd love that. So I ended up going a few times. I was still living at the beach, which is like a 2-hour drive. And in 2 months, I was ready to give up my apartment or release. And I decided I'm going to move into the city. I'm going to help these children. So I moved to the city, and for the next 18 months, I worked in the city in this real sort of very strange. They brought me in with a couple of cops every day or with him. So, escorted in because it was kind of dangerous. But the children were wonderful. And I think that hit me. I realized, oh my gosh, I love working with people and in these diverse situations and understanding it and just really getting to understand them. And it didn't hit me right away. But later, when I came back with the pandemic, I started really thinking, okay, now what am I going to do? My whole life is turned over. What am I going to do? And then I discovered through friends, hey, we know you. You might want to look into this. And that was the Rhodes Wellness College.
Wow, okay. And so tell me more about this, this work that you're doing now. What is it that you're focusing on as a counselor?
Well, I finished last year. I graduated and got my license and everything. And I think for me, I wasn't really sure. I still wanted to work with women for women empowerment. I signed up with the Vancouver Women's Health Collective. And there was women, that came in and they needed counseling and that. And I started sort of working with a lot of them. And I think that's when it started forming. I wasn't really sure which direction I was going to go, but I realized one of the things that came up so often was women who somehow along the road lost their empowerment. There was not always, but a lot of times, low self-esteem, low self-worth, no boundaries, people pleasing, not feeling confident, and then taking on relationships that just didn't work for them. And most likely for most of those things, right? And I just thought, that's sounds like kind of my life. That sounds like my conditioning. And then I just thought, this is kind of what I've been wanting to do. And didn't really realize what it was. And I just thought, wow, have had so much experience in my own life and going through everything that I think I can help women get to that point where they can start accepting themselves and giving them their self-love and setting those boundaries and putting themselves on the pedestal rather than the other person.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, when you said at some point lost their empowerment, it really made me wonder, because you were in a really, in a great role, as you said, in a great house, and of course, the marriage that you had was challenging because you didn't have support. But in that situation, can you pinpoint where you feel that you lost? So was it because of the sense of obligation or guilt? What was it that contributed to you feeling less empowered?
I think because I put everyone first before
Mm-hmm.
me. And, I always liken it back to that. You see there's ads where they put on, the plane decompresses and all of a sudden all the oxygen masks come down. And the parent puts on
Yeah.
their oxygen mask first, right? And they tell you, then you put in the people that you want to help, you put their mask on. But first you have to put your mask on.
Yeah.
And I felt like that was where I went wrong, that I didn't take care of myself first. And so then I was making decisions based on
Mm-hmm.
what was good for the other person, not good for me.
Right. Okay. And then that's when you start to feel like blame and resentment towards that person, right? Because you feel stuck in the situation.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily their fault. It's that we kind of allow that to happen because we get into that people pleasing. We don't want to hurt the other person. We feel more sympathy, and or empathy. A lot of time it's sympathy, and we we tend to then forget about ourselves, and then there's that resentment. Why does that person not appreciate me? Why does that person, why are they always putting themselves first? And
Mm-hmm.
it's because we've conditioned them to do that, right?
Yeah. It's fascinating to me. And so is that what you would call codependency?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, in many cases, yes. Codependency is, yeah, you just you live in this fear of losing that person, and you want to be near them all the time, right? And you end up people pleasing all the time because you just don't want to lose that person. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, for women who are in these kinds of situations where it just feels like such a difficult road out sometimes, to make changes like this, what would you say would be the first steps or easiest steps that they could take?
Um, so just to clarify, so you're saying anyone who's in a position where they feel like they don't have their power?
Well, for women that are carrying sometimes, because I have lately encountered more situations where, for example, women are the ones that have the financial well-being, and so they feel obligated to
Mm-hmm.
take care of the other partner. And that sense of guilt, obligation can help them feel trapped or makes them feel trapped, right? And
Yeah.
so I'm curious what because that's a very specific scenario, right? And it's also, of course, challenging if you don't have the financial means to leave, but it's a different situation. So I was curious what you think are the first initial steps that help to move out of that, I guess, sense of being stuck in the
Mm,
obligation,
yeah.
to make sure, because then, it's like making sure the other person doesn't end up homeless, those kinds of questions I've seen coming up, right? So I don't know
Mm.
if you have any thoughts or tips or suggestions.
Well, for me, it's hard. Like you said, every situation is different. For me, I had a little bit of guilt, but I didn't have a lot because, my husband was quite capable, but he just wasn't helping. So that resentment came, and that actually helped me. That resentment and that understanding that, this person was really quite capable kind of made me a little bit angry. So anger creates reaction and movement, right? And that was how I got out of that, for that, and recognizing that. But it took me a while to recognize that. And I think there's questions that we have to ask ourselves. Is this person legitimately helpless?
Mm-hmm.
And and if they are, then, are how obligated should we be to this person? Now, if it's someone you're in a marriage and you've been together and it's a very loving marriage, but you still feel stuck, I'm not sure what to tell you, because that really represents two people who, maybe they've fallen out of love, but it's no fault of any. And then it's going to take a sit down conversation of where do we go from there. And that's really tough. I can see that as being one of the toughest. And I'm not going to be the one that's going to have the answer for that, though, unfortunately, because I think really then it needs a lot of communication and where they want
Mm-hmm.
to go from there. If they're financially, like I was financially fine. And even with my divorce and giving more than half to my husband, um, there it still didn't break me, but it changed my lifestyle, but it didn't break me. And I think you can stick in bad spots for a very long time when there's a fear of, finance. What do? You don't want to be homeless. And I really feel for people that are like that. And I think um, a coach or a therapist can help you get through a lot of, your mind tells you things,
Mm-hmm.
and you can use certain tools to sort of get through those. Are they really true?
Yeah.
There's so much in Canada. Like, our government system helps people get through tough spots. There's welfare, there's EI, there's all these different things that you could apply for to help you get into a different. It's If it's an abusive relationship, you can get out. They're
Mm-hmm.
not ideal by any chance, but it really depends on how much you need to save yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, my ripping off the band-aid might have been a bit harsh, and it was quick, but it wasn't quick leading up to that. Like, it took me many years to get to that point where I just knew. I had no qualms about it. I had nothing, and I just knew I have to save myself. I can't
Yeah.
be the people pleaser, and I have to save myself.
Yeah. And that is, I think, often what it comes down to, is that when it gets to that point, that your health starts to suffer. And, I understand where you're coming from here, because my father has bipolar disorder. My mother has been
Mm,
the caregiver, and I have been the caregiver. And so, for her, it's been a really difficult decision sometimes,
yeah,
whether she takes care of her health or him and his health, right?
yeah,
And so I know that there can be very tricky situations when making these decisions. And so that's why I find it can help to really just identify what are the simplest steps rather than trying to figure out the whole situation immediately. What are the initial steps that can be taken, right? Whether it's getting more knowledge about what's available or getting support about having some of these difficult conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's where I think it starts to be easier to just have one simple step or two steps at a time
Yeah.
to break
Yeah.
it down into something that's manageable, right? And that's,
Yeah.
what I thought is valuable.
Yeah.
Um,
And sometimes, Kasha, it's sometimes just making a few changes within your life. So start taking care of yourself.
mhm.
Go out and get away for an hour or two for your hobby or for friends. Start, like, a lot of women in a marriage become disconnected with their friends, with their community, because they're so entrenched in that relationship.
Yeah.
And sometimes all it needs to get rid of that unstuck feeling or that stuck feeling is to go out and change your life just a little bit, just one baby step. Just go out and take some art classes and meet new people, and and get that a different feeling before,
Yeah.
because like you said, it there are situations that are extremely hard. So in
Mhm.
that case, what can you do for yourself, even if it's a little bit, to get yourself out of that feeling of despair? Because that you can get to a point where you just feel despair, and then your motivation runs down, and that's really, really hard, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's such a great point because, I think one of the other things that happens is that people start to forget the things that they used to do before they got married, before they had kids, the things that really brought them joy. And this is one of the things that
Mm,
one of my clients recently said, I really want to start doing more creative things again. That sense of creativity was completely missing for her. And she had stepped into leadership where she felt she actually had less access to be creative than before. So, one of the things we worked on was actually identifying what is it that she could do to fulfill that value, right? Because I think that one of the things that often people despair about is that sense of unhappiness, but not understanding which values are actually not getting fulfilled, right? So you had that need for support to be able to express yourself,
yeah.
and that could have been filled by someone else, right? But there was nobody else there, right? So by understanding what's the real need, the root that's causing that unhappiness, we can meet at least one or two of those values much faster than solving the whole situation that we're in. And I
Yeah.
found when I've been going through transitions that that's something that wasn't really obvious. I really went through that soul searching process myself about 12 years ago when I was leaving my role, and I looked at my core values and started to design my life based on those values. And I find that that process alone has been so valuable for the clients that I've worked with as well, because then it's
Yeah.
obvious that this is what they need. And more recently, I was really reflecting on how out of touch we can be with our real needs. That sense of frustration can come up, annoyance, but we don't always know what it is we need. And that's something that I found interesting because it wasn't obvious to me sometimes what it is that I had to do because, um, I'd be annoyed about something, but it really took me a bit to understand, okay, this is what it is that I need. And then understanding that need, I found opens up a lot more options to fulfill that need rather than just being upset about someone or something. where we don't really feel empowered, to do anything. So that was something that I really observed in the last few months, even for myself,
Mm-hmm.
that we sometimes can have trouble connecting to what our real needs are, and taking the time to do that really matters.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you just said it beautifully. And I love that you mentioned values, because the values are so important, that we do know our, core values. And when we're straying from them, if we really know what they are and we start straying from them, we can realize quickly why we're not happy, because we're not aligning with our values. If we know our values, it really helps us on our path.
Yeah, and I think that leads to just really that awareness and self-knowledge is so important before we get into a relationship, right? Because that really helps us to make choices that are more aligned to who we are, and that helps so much in relationships, right? And I'm just reflecting on our whole conversation, because when we talked about people pleasing, if someone's going into the relationship and puts the other person on a pedestal and
Mhm.
people pleases toward them, that's a whole different dynamic than understanding what you want in a relationship, what's important to you, and then choosing someone who's compatible to to you, right? The whole idea of how those relationships would pan out is completely different, in my mind.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
so, I mean, especially in relationships, right? If we're not really sort of equal, each bringing in their own thing into that relationship, each with their own values, um, and their own autonomy, think I don't have high hopes for that relationship. If there's one person on a pedestal and the other person is people pleasing, I think there's going to be so much resentment, and so many things going to come out of that. So yeah, there's have you ever read that book? It's by Mark Groves, called Liberated Love.
No, I haven't.
Have you ever heard of it? Oh my gosh. If you want to know about relationships, and he wrote it with his wife, and Kylie McQueeth, and they go through boundaries, and they have like a 3-month sort of bubble period where they get to know each other, and they talk about everything, values and boundaries, and it's such a great book because it's written um, that everybody, it's not written like in a therapeutic style, but it uses a lot of therapy information in that, and it's a really wonderful book. I highly recommend it to anyone who wants to be in a relationship, even is in a relationship already, to sort of help them. And they go into everything, and it's a really great book.
Thank you. I will definitely check it out. I'm always learning, and I always love learning about things that make our lives better. And of course, we all can we can all be better at relationships, I think, right? Because it is challenging sometimes, especially if there are more difficult times in our lives. If someone isn't feeling well, right? I think it's
Yeah.
valuable to learn as much as we can about how to handle certain situations. And so, with your work, are you focusing with your clients on mostly relationship work, or career transitions? What's your preference?
Well, right now it's not so much relationships as how you are in a relationship, and why you react certain ways, and then seeing sort of the cycle of repetitive habits or certain beliefs, and really kind of looking at who you show up as a person. So it's more about, if I was just going to say, women empowerment, right? And finding your voice, um, finding your values and really sticking to them, and looking after yourself and finding that self-acceptance. So it's all about bringing back self-acceptance, accepting you as you are, like fully, your shadow side, your light side, right? And understanding where each of those come from. And even the shadow side, understanding how they're important to who you are as well, that we shouldn't feel guilt or shame for them. They're there, and they are who, it's like a painting where you have layers and layers of paint, right? But you would never get that feel if you didn't have some of those other paints that you don't necessarily like the color of, but now they make that top really beautiful, right? So
Yeah.
it's sort of like bringing that all out, and finding that acceptance in ourselves, and finding how we can be happy in life.
I really appreciate, your openness, and I think it's so valuable for others who are going through similar experiences to discuss these things openly. So I appreciate your time today.
Well, I appreciate what you do, Kasha. And yes, I think hearing other women's stories really helped me as well. So hopefully there's some little tidbits in there for other women, and I really I hope so. And thanks again. It was so good to see you again.
Thank you. And for those of you that do want some support, you are more than welcome to reach out to us at any time. So you never have to feel alone.